Hello and welcome back to Eagle-Eyed Football. Right, got a really special guest today. You may have seen him on KG, the comedian's Five Things Deep. You may have seen him chiming in as well on United Fan TV. Our very own Santiago. Morning.
Good morning, Rich. Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure.
No, thank you. To put this into context and perspective, it's about 5 a.m. in the States. So, no, really appreciate the sacrifice and the time and such. We're taking this into a new scope, and we're going to introduce some more aspects of that in later on in the show. But we're actually here to talk about the Mexican element regarding players who have obviously come across to Europe and also America as well. Obviously, Santiago at the moment resides in America, but he is of Mexican heritage. So it's nice to obviously hear from both sides of the coin for himself and for us to learn as well. So first things first, Mexican and American players. So there's been a massive influx of both really coming into European football, which is obviously great for Mexico. It's great for America. It's great even for the European leagues to get that bit of different skill sets. Let's start off with Mexico. Are there any players from Mexican football who you feel, yes, you know what, they've had a massive impact in European football, and it's also benefited the national team?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think historically, when you think about that and you look at it, you think of certain players that have made some really great strides, like Hugo Sanchez. You have Chicharito, Javier Hernandez. And you have other various ones, like you had Rafael Marquez at Barcelona in the early 2000s. And so, for example, one thing that, I've seen is that we had a very nice generation of players who all came through, were all playing in Europe. You had the Dos Santos brothers coming out of Barcelona's academy. Unfortunately, they didn't really cut it at Barcelona, but, they still play their trade for a bit in Spain. You have our current captain, Guardado. He plays in Spain at Real Betis. And you have, a couple of other players there that are just very influential in the national team. You have, Raul Jimenez. You have Chucky Lozano. You have Jesus Corona. You have oh my gosh, Hector Herrera. They're all pretty much your almost guaranteed starting 11. A lot of that generation of players, unfortunately, is starting to fade out a little bit. But you still have a couple of younger talents that are coming through in regards to that. And I think you're definitely seeing that in the U.S. team. You're having folks like Pulisic, and that are just pretty much going out there and doing great things. Weston McKennie, and I think for on that side of the coin, you have a very, very exciting U.S. team building up.
Absolutely. So obviously with the Mexican national team, do you feel like them expanding and going out to these European sides has benefited the national team? Does it cause any sort of friction or division within the camp? Because obviously maybe some players may think they're better than others. What's the feeling like out there regarding Mexico?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think it does. I think there are levels in regards to your type of player. The Mexican league, it is a competitive league. They do like to bring a lot of foreign talent, from South America and such. And so on that end, it does have, a competitiveness to it. There's a lot of money that's put into it on that end as well. But I almost always feel that generally those players that are in Europe are almost, maybe not necessarily preferred, but it seems like they tend to be the best players, and so generally they also tend to be the ones that walk into the national team. Now, as far as creating division or anything of the like, I don't think that necessarily happens too much. I think generally a lot of these players are, tend to bond well enough with the Mexican League players. I mean, most of them do start in the Mexican League, so there is that common ground there. So yeah, it's a really good question. Now, as far as on the U.S. side, I'm not 100% sure. I haven't heard anything of the like, but I would imagine it would be sort of similar.
Yeah, absolutely. I was fortunate to actually be in. Well, I was initially in San Diego at the time, but then I took the train down to Tijuana. Mm-hmm. And this was at the start of the 2010 World Cup, and the first game against South Africa, which was a very, very good game. But what I did realize is that the passion for the Mexican national side, honestly, the Mexican fans probably out there unmatched. Like, do you get to go to games often? What's your experience of, just being a fan?
Yeah. I mean, so one thing that we generally see in especially here in the U.S., it's a lot of times, sometimes the national team will come and play, whether it be friendlies or whether it be sometimes CONCACAF. I mean, we had the Copa America in 2016, and that was a crazy experience because so Mexican games will sell out, and so at the Copa America, I had the fortune to go to a couple different games. I went and saw Colombia, I went and saw Argentina, and unfortunately those games didn't actually quite sell out. Versus whenever I went to the Mexican national team, I couldn't get seats. I was this close to the roof over at so that was just one of the. It's a really cool experience. I mean, Mexico, they're a weird team. I feel like they have an established league. They have the established fan support, yet somehow they always seem to get stuck at that fourth game. They can't seem to really get past a certain height, and that's one of those things I think that we will be touching on, a little bit too as well, in regards to kind of, sort of what does the future hold.
Absolutely, we can even bring that in now. Like, why do you feel like there's a barrier to the progression in Mexican regarding national team?
So that's a good question. So we're talking about the players that are in Europe. And I talked about some of that generation that we had and how that generation is starting to sort of fade out a little bit. I think that specific generation that we had probably had the most potential, or sort of, in my eyes, seemed to be the highest level of quality to have gotten us over the line, to have gotten us. They came close in a couple of the World Cups. I think of the Netherlands. It came down to unfortunately a penalty. And the consensus around that, if you ask in Mexico, that was not a penalty to this day.
Yeah.
But one of the trends that I noticed is I was looking through a lot of the European leagues, and in regards to the bigger leagues too, I noticed a big drop off in regards to the players who are in Europe, in regards to the Mexican side, compared to the U.S. side. So, for example, a lot of those former players are now playing in the MLS. They decided to go ahead and instead of playing in Spain or where they were, they're now playing for those nice contracts to sort of winding down their career. But this might be kind of a crazy stat too, but out of pretty much some of the better leagues, like I said, you currently have 13 Mexican players in Europe, and in comparison to the U.S., they have 75. Right, so if you are a part of the Mexican Federation, that should be a concerning stat. I mean, we could even break it down in numbers too. And what I did too is, when I took it into account, I looked and For example, in England, I looked at the Premier League and the Championship. I know there's a couple players, in League One, League Two, but just kind of wanted to focus more, on those top two leagues when it came to some of the bigger countries. And so, if you break it down too, like England, you have 10 U.S. players versus 1 Mexican player. In Spain, it's an equal 4-4. In Italy, 4 U.S. players versus 1 Mexican players. Germany, 12 U.S. players and no Mexican players. And sort of the stats like that seem to indicate, that there are more American players in the U.S. right now, and it will probably continue to grow. Which, in my opinion, when you think of the future and what that holds, really, then that is going to be, unfortunately, as much as I hate to say this as a Mexican fan, I think the U.S. will surpass Mexico at one point, and Mexico will have to try and catch up. So
that is a very scary fact, actually. Those statistics that you've brought out, because obviously, I think about Mexico, and I think about the era of Carlos Vela, Chicharito, Marquez, obviously, even though it was coming towards the end, Chucky Lorenzo, some awesome Lozano, sorry, some really, really talented players, and particularly, especially after that last World Cup, I felt, Mexico, if they build on this, it's going to be a problem. To now see that there's a lot more Americans who, back in the day in England, you'd hear American players and you'd laugh. You know what I mean? Mainly because they call football soccer, but the influx of American players that are now coming across into Europe, you've got who's one that plays for Juventus, Weston McKennie and such. You got Pulisic, like you said. The amount of players before, it was just Tim Howard and Brian McBride. Landon Donovan. You know what? There's so many more American players, and you can see the progression in that national side. So I can understand your concerns, obviously, that not many Mexican players are getting out there. And so
and I think one of the crazy things about that too is, I think maybe the difference is that some of the American players might just be going to those youth academies, or pretty much forcing different scenarios as to kind of how to go ahead and go about making that move abroad. This is actually also an interesting stat where sometimes that passion in Mexican football and having an established league already can be sort of a unfortunate factor when it comes to transfers and things of that nature. So this one might also be a little bit eye-opening. But as far as I looked into the most expensive transfers from Mexican players to Europe versus the most expensive transfers of U.S. players to Europe in the past 5 years, and the top 5, you'll see a difference. Would be Irving, Chucky Lozano, $15 million to PSV. Eric Gutierrez, $9 million to PSV. Edson Alvarez, $17 million to Ajax. Diego Lainez, $15 million to Real Betis, and Gerardo Arteaga, $4 million to Genk. Now, so that's pretty decent fees coming outside of Europe in comparison to the MLS. I mean, when you're looking at it, the most expensive transfer outbound for the U.S. was Matt Miazga for $5.4 million to Chelsea. You think of players like Tyler Adams; they go for $3 million to RB Leipzig, right? You have
he's done well.
And so it's just you're looking at it, and some of these players are going for about 3 times the amount of money. So naturally, these players are going to be scouted, and it's going to be a much lower risk investment. If we want to look at it from that point of view, for some of the bigger teams.
Absolutely. Just looking at Liga MX just briefly, do you feel like the lack of exposure plays a part as well? Because like the MLS is massively now on TV now, so.
Yeah, and that's a great question. I mean, I don't know. I guess living over here, I don't necessarily know how often MLS or Liga MX is seen outside of Mexico or outside of the Americas, right? I'm sure the time difference has to play a role into that. I mean, I don't know. I would imagine that folks in Europe having such a condensed amount of leagues that they can watch, in their time zones would also play a part of that. I don't know if do you.
In England, you rarely get a Liga MX game.
Okay.
The MLS is on more regularly. Yes, the time zones don't help, but you get the odd time where you might get a 10 p.m. kickoff for an MLS game here in Europe, which is not too bad.
Right.
So even just the fact that you said there that you wasn't even sure about how it's viewed just shows that there is a massive discrepancy in a sense. Whereas obviously the big leagues, the Premier League, La Liga, Liga to an extent, Bundesliga, Serie A probably is showed so much more across the world, really. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, and then in the MLS's favor, I mean, you have, ESPN and general outlets like that will report some of those news. Whereas, unfortunately, with Mexico, I mean, you do have ESPN Deportes, but I'm not necessarily sure how often that's seen outside of the U.S., considering it's a small viewership in the U.S. alone. So. So that, I mean, that could play a part into it. I think too. We value because of that passion. I think we also tend to overvalue our players. We tend to have because, for example, I can give you a couple different examples of transfer sagas, or for example, Jesus Corona. He had to run down his contract at Monterrey. In order to go and get a free transfer to the Netherlands, right? You have a player I'm sure you've probably never heard of, but his name is Jürgen Damm, and so he's actually Mexican but with German heritage, and he was linked with Roma a few years ago, but I think they wanted. The Mexican team that he was on at the time wanted somewhere around 13 or 12 million. Roma offered up at most 8 million. So there was that disconnect. He was never able to get his transfer, and now he's playing in Atlanta. So,
wow, that must have been like really deep. Like, I mean, for him, like in the sense of like, wow, a dream move to Serie A, and now I'm in the MLS. Sort of things.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, sometimes money does talk. Unfortunately, so it is one of those things that and I think because of things like that, and sometimes maybe the players that are currently in Europe maybe think of it a little bit not so much as the current contract that I'm on, or versus maybe my club is willing to allow me to go for a little bit of a cheaper value in regards to some of these Mexican teams.
Understandable. Well, let's move on to specific player, actually. As you're a Man United fan yourself, Chicharito Hernandez. He's an outstanding goal scorer. So I just want just talk about, like, obviously as a Mexican, your feelings regarding his career at club level. And then we can also talk about international level as well. Yeah.
So, I mean, he's Mexico's all-time leading goal scorer. So he is a fabulous player. I think with him, it's interesting. To kind of go back to the whole viewership of different leagues. But yeah, I remember when he signed for United. He was sort of the introduction of United to a lot of the Mexican population. You generally do see folks wear, you know, Barcelona, Real Madrid, United shirts, but you don't necessarily have those fans that will go ahead and watch those games on a consistent level. Just because of, again, the time difference. You know, sometimes you get 6 a.m. games, sometimes, you know, so sometimes it is a little bit difficult to catch those on a regular basis. But I mean, I remember the conversations, you know, with in regards to Chicharito, and you know, it was just a constant. You know, everybody was just talking about United. Everybody was talking about how he was doing well, and he was adapting well, and how good of a talent he you know, he had the potential to become. And so it was really kind of neat to see that that influx, right? Yeah, and likewise, you see that with other players too, who are in Europe. Funny enough, so prior to pandemic, I actually went to the UK and watched the United game in February of last year. And I came back, you know, just before everything kind of shut down. But the main question that I got from family and friends was, oh, you know, they were happy to hear that I went to go see United, but they were a little bit more interested on whether I went to go see Wolves and saw Raul Jimenez play. So
that makes sense. Yeah.
So in a way, it's sort of you know, funny. We tend to have a little bit more interest in our own players too. So you know, on that end, you did see a lot of, like I said, a lot of influx. You know, around being watching the Premier League. Now, as far as Chicharito himself, you know, I think he did outstandingly well. You know, he was coming on, and he never really fully got himself established in the United team, unfortunately. And I think the change in coaching staff also sort of took a number on him. You know, and unfortunately, after Sir Alex Ferguson retired, never really got much minutes in the United team after that. And so I think the Real Madrid transfer was a little bit of shock. You know, I was surprised as anybody. I expected him to maybe, you know, take a little bit of a step down, not, you know, instead of sideways, and you know, become a super sub after Karim Benzema. So.
This is it. And I mean, like his career at United, he kind of was like a super sub, but he was also the guy that, listen, if the ball's in the box,
yeah,
lethal.
Yeah, that man could score with his head, left foot, right foot, the back of his head, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, he was always a joy to watch. And interestingly enough, yeah, I mean, when he had that spell, you know, that he necessarily couldn't get as much game time, it did sort of, unfortunately, fall around the 2014 World Cup. So, you know, but, you know, ultimately, I think he will, you know, live on to be one of the best players, you know, Mexican players that we've had to date.
Yeah. Is he still involved at the moment with the Mexican national side?
He is currently playing at LA Galaxy. I don't think, I think he's 33 now, so unfortunately I don't think there will be too much involvement based on the lineups that I've seen and some of the news. But
okay, and obviously with you mentioned Raul Jimenez, he obviously suffered a really bad injury. What do you think the future holds for him and the Mexican national side?
Well, you know, definitely, you know, just you know, that was one of those things that it was a very scary injury. I'm glad to hear he's doing well. I'm glad to hear he's recovering and taking all the steps needed to continue to recover. You know, hopefully, he's still under 30, so hopefully, you know, he has, you know, some years left, and I think he'll be a very influential figure in the next World Cup. But, you know, as far as, because I know he's sort of taking this summer off, you know, to recover as well. Yeah. So, you know, and in fact, you know, I'm not sure you may have had a chance to see it, but Mexico has played in the Nations League. It's a new tournament that they had here in CONCACAF. But yeah, I mean, I think that they are massively missing a center forward like him. Currently in the lineup, they're having to play Chucky Lozano, who is normally plays right wing up front. So, definitely a big addition.
Cool. Now, you said you had some interesting viewpoints, which I don't know anything about, guys. So I'm actually going to be listening attentively to this because this sounds like it might be very interesting.
Yeah. So I've had a few conversations in my time here in the U.S. with fans who are unfortunately not necessarily soccer fans, if we want to call it that. Football fans. That you'll have folks who prefer to watch hockey or American football, basketball, and so one of the things that I had a conversation with, and I never was able to understand their viewpoint, but they in their opinion, they believe that, and I quote, "Soccer would be more interesting if we removed penalty kicks."
What?
And their argument was that it affects the game too much as is. So, and I was like, whoa, well, I mean, is that during the game or penalty shootouts or both? I think he meant during the game.
What's the alternative?
That he's a hockey fan, so he said, let's instill something in regards to power plays. And I was like, that might work out in hockey because you have smaller teams and a smaller field, but that's not going to do anything to put some, being 10 on 11. And so that was sort of my view take on it. So the other one that I have heard, and this one maybe perhaps is a little bit more of a reserved argument, is the term parity. So essentially equality amongst all teams. That's one of the draws to this other specific person. They like to see a turnover in who is going to be the league winner,
right.
Who's going to be making it to the playoffs, right? And so the draft system does assist in that sense to an extent, and so that's one of those things that I think they perhaps see certain European leagues and see, for example, the German league. You know that a large contingent of it, Bayern is going to win that. So
those were the 2 points, or were there more?
So those were the two ones that I've gotten recently. I've heard all sorts of things like splitting up the halves into quarters or periods. I know that the show Ted Lasso jokingly plays on it a little bit, but they don't believe that they should have ties or draws, right? You should have one specific winner, and unfortunately, sometimes it don't necessarily. Perhaps maybe if you don't grow up watching football, or if you don't necessarily understand the game to its full extent, that's sort of the viewpoints that you do see. I mean, these are real viewpoints. I am not making these up. So,
right. Let's move into some of these. The penalty one, that's mad. Like, absolutely bonkers. I can't believe that. To do away with penalty, like, what do they expect, to have like a drop ball or to play in from like the byline? Like, it's just no. It was bad enough that at one stage they were dribbling from like the halfway line to take their penalties. So yeah, no. Regarding the parity, I guess some people may see there's good reasoning behind it, in a sense. Like, for example, A lot of the European leagues get dubbed as Farmers League, especially through Premier League fans as such. Mainly because it's not as, and I put in quotation marks, competitive. Oh, there we go. Like you said, the Bayern Munichs will win the league most of the time. Juventus won the league about 7 times in a row before Inter obviously broken that duck. With Spain, it's predominantly Real Madrid and Barcelona, with the odd time Atletico Madrid. And so I kind of understand the aspects of the parity. Now that obviously then once again goes down to like the financial status. Some clubs just have more money, you know, and there's not much you can really do about it because these owners are buying the clubs. And obviously we're going to speak more about the American system in a sense, because like this whole European Super League thing, had that gone through, we would have seen a draft system in football, and that would have caused carnage. You know, the American owners predominantly are spearheading it. Obviously, got Florentino Perez as well. Sorry, Real Madrid, who's really he really wants it. You know, I think personally it's because Real Madrid have no money. Like they're trying to rebuild their stadium and such. But the American owners, you got the Glazers, you got Kroenkes, Enoch. They're really, they're really spearheading this European Super League. And if it does happen, there will be a draft system. That, like you mentioned, the 4 quarters, that could potentially happen. You're going to have halftime shows. It will be played in a similar aspect to like building up to a Super Bowl, if that makes sense, where then you're going to have a halftime show. The whole game will change. You know, it will be detrimental to football as we know it.
Yeah, and you know, as a somebody living stateside and witnessing this, it's just it's maddening. You know, there's nothing sometimes you can do to change some of those viewpoints, but you know, you see them and you're like, they should stay separate. You know, there's a reason why football is football, and there's a reason why hockey is the way that it is. But you know, so I definitely agree with you. I mean, sort of an interesting question too, and something that I'd love to kind of relate to fans is, I know that you're, I believe, Crystal Palace fan.
Absolutely.
So, in regards to, what would you say to some of those American fans? Like, I'm a Crystal Palace fan. I know, historically, the chances are going to be slimmer to win the league, but, and anything is possible, in my opinion. I guess, what would you say to them?
I would say to them, look, at the end of the day, you've got to look at clubs like Leicester City, Wigan Athletic. Leicester's going to win the league. Wigan's going to win an FA Cup. And that's why we love football. It's the fairy tale side to football. It makes it the beautiful game. You can see in the Premier League that we can go and beat Manchester United at Old Trafford, and then obviously we can go and lose at home to like a Burnley. It's the unpredictability of the league which makes it so beautiful. If a draft system came in place, the parity would actually take away that aspect of, yes, you may potentially get a different winner each year, but at the same time, different teams will have a negative effect on their club and such. Now, we would like to think, as Palace fans, that we are earning the right. For the last 8 seasons or so, we've earned the right to be in the Premier League. We may not have been good, like throughout, but we've earned the right. Teams that are getting promoted earn the right. And don't get me wrong, we would love investment, heavy investment. We don't even have a manager right now, But at the end of the day, I don't want to be, oh, here you go. We're kind of gifting you your potential victory. Because when you look at like the draft system, especially like, let's say, basketball, Golden State were nowhere at one stage, and because of the draft system, became champions, like world champs, like 3 out of 4 years. Then you've got the whole aspect of like the trading system. Like some clubs are just Brooklyn right now, and I mean I don't want us to go too far into obviously that's going to be our next segment, but you've got Griffin, Durant, Kyrie.
Yeah, I mean,
it's mental.
Yeah,
so in hindsight, they're technically the Man City of basketball. So either way, this whole aspect of a draft system doesn't necessarily guarantee that there's going to be parity.
Yeah, and that's a fair point. I think that within basketball, you definitely have that problem of having those super teams. I think, and that does bring up a very valid point. I mean, I don't necessarily think there are too many Man City fans in the U.S. I know there's always a joke there's not any in the U.K. either, but
Yeah.
but that that's sort of in that sense good for them and in the long run, but at the same time that massive investment really did bring them kind of out of nowhere to the top.
This is it. No, thanks a lot so much for this initial part. We decided we were going to break this up into 2 segments. So that was about the Mexico national team, and I'm sure they'll come back into fruition. They'll become great again. They always produce amazing players. But as I mentioned from the jump, got exciting news. Myself and Santiago are actually going to start a show together, and it's going to be really dissecting American sports. And not only that, we're going to get my view as a fan from the UK of American sports, and we'll even still talk about UK sports from the viewpoint of an American citizen Mexican fan as well. So, I'm looking forward to what this show is going to hold. So, we'll see you back shortly. So, welcome back to Eagle-Eyed Football. And, myself and Santiago, we're going to start a new show together. Like I said, we're going to be looking at predominantly American sports. But not only that, we'll also still discuss like UK sports and sports around the world pretty much, and then have opposing viewpoints on both. So, Santiago, I want to get your viewpoints on the American system. So obviously you get a lot of kids that they go to high school and they play whatever sport they play, and obviously the big ones are football in your sense, which is American football here, and obviously basketball. They seem to be the big 2. How does the system work in America regarding high school and making that transition towards like the NBA, the NFL?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, generally, there are your rare cases, where they are able to go ahead and go, to the pro leagues. But for the most part, you have generally, so you have 2-year and 4-year universities. Your 2-year universities are also known as junior colleges, and so generally, folks that get scouted, they get offers from high school, from the universities, and they go ahead and accept an offer from there. It is a rather big deal, and so once you go ahead and play at the college level, then you generally have like I said, you play at your 2-year college, and then you transfer into a 4-year university, or you play out at your 4-year university. Now, not necessarily everybody does stay throughout their whole university career. Some folks do choose to go ahead and try and go to the draft a year or 2 early, depending on their talent and in regards to perhaps some of their influential factors that they may have around there. And then so generally one thing to keep in mind too is that as far as the draft, you can only enter once. So you sort of have kind of like that one shot to go into the draft itself. I mean, you can play on the reserves of teams or do tryouts and walk on afterwards, and sometimes that does happen.
So let's touch on that. So if you happen to go into the draft and you're unsuccessful, what happens next?
Yeah, so there are some folks that that they'll go to the draft, and sometimes the combines and all that stuff. Perhaps they just have an off day, don't do as well. You can still go and be invited to the preseason camps and you know practice with some of these teams and let those coaches really take a deeper look into how you would fit into that system, or how somebody else would. You do have sort of open tryouts. I think one of the things we had a running back here in Houston years ago who he used to drive you know um, for UK terms it would be a lorry, so he was a lorry driver. Here's an 18-wheeler. So that's what he did for a living, and he tried out for the Texans as a running back, and he made it. So he was on the team for quite some time after that. So so there are certain chances. It's not like it's a one-time deal and that's it.
Yeah.
I think it's just specifically for the combine and draft itself.
Right. Over here in the UK, like education's a massive deal. And back in the day, what used to happen is if you're trying to make it a pro, you'd have to focus and dedicate all your time to trying to become a professional footballer. And you may not get the education at all. That's changed a lot, where clubs are now offering like different courses and such to make sure that there's something to fall back on in case of the eventuality that they don't make it pro. What's the education system like regarding education and playing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and big up to all the college athletes and all that. Now, generally the way that I've been told about it, and the way that I've seen it happen, is that you go to school full time, and then you play full time. So it's almost like having two full-time jobs. In regards to how they balance it. Now, I'm sure that if you're playing football, during the football season, you probably have a slightly easier workload in your studies in comparison to football itself, right? Or whenever during the off season, I'm sure that's when you take your more difficult classes and whatnot. But on that sense, that is something that in America they continuously look at in regards to how to help balance some of that stuff out. And so sometimes whether it be sometimes perhaps getting tutors for the team, or perhaps reviewing and adjusting those specific classes so that you do have your slightly easier classes during the season.
Okay. On that, like there seems to be, and I want to see your viewpoint on this.
Yeah.
Do the better players get a pass regarding their education because of the aspect of winning?
Yeah. So that, and that's going to be sort of a tricky question. I think that will sort of be on an individual case-by-case basis, and it's also going to be a factor based on the university that they're currently at. So you have some schools that really do prioritize making sure that everybody has those education requirements. You do have some universities that do have attendance requirements versus other universities that perhaps don't have as tight of requirements. So, for example, I have heard that some universities don't expect, as long as you go ahead and you take your tests or and you do well in your classes, you're not really required to show up outside of a couple times. So and that would be a massively different university experience. Whereas somebody who might be, you're only allowed a certain amount of absences, before getting, your grades or your marks impacted.
Right. Okay. Which leads on to the next question. Do coaches really care?
And that's a great question. To be 100% honest, I don't know the answer. I think the universities always show that they care because it's always a good thing to put out there, right? You generally, I've seen it personally where universities will put it out there, saying, we recognize this specific student athlete for obtaining really high marks, across their classes. But you never really see the flip side of the coin, right? Naturally, I'm sure there are student athletes that struggle with that time management, especially being so young, and so that perhaps they maybe need a little bit of extra assistance, or perhaps there might be a little bit of extra leniency, but unfortunately, I don't think that will really ever be openly talked about.
Right. Because I've watched a few of the Last Chance U's series on Netflix, and it's been very interesting to see how it's so easy for young players who may have made mistakes in their life to have their dreams just shattered, just like a blink of an eye, and because of maybe their economic status, some of them are having to sleep in their own cars. Like you said, some of them will finish playing the game and then have to go straight to work. It's really very interesting, how it can either work for you or work completely against you. This drive to become a pro.
Yeah, and unfortunately, sometimes the economic status too can play a big part of that. I remember reading an article, and it was a very touching article about a specific player. They had just gone and played a bowl game. For those fans in the UK who may not watch college sports, so a bowl game is sort of a special game that you can only qualify for if you win, if your team wins a minimum of 6 games in the season or not. That's generally how you qualify for what is considered a bowl game or a championship game. And so they went, and you travel and you play at a university that is outside of your conference or your league. So it is a little bit of a special deal. And unfortunately, you had one player whose entire family, came out, supported him, and was doing really great. And and on the flip side of this, you had another player whose family unfortunately couldn't, travel to see him, and he was walking outside of, after the stadium, everything sort of shut down. He was walking around because he really had nowhere to go, and he didn't have unfortunately enough money in his pocket to even have a meal. And the other player in his family happened to see him, and made sure that he came with them, and he was fed and everything. So you do have some of these extreme cases.
Well, but obviously you said, even with that extreme case, the team kind of came together to support, Yeah. And I feel like that's probably, especially during American sports in college and high school, I think that's the biggest attribute. You can see the camaraderie, the love. Yes, they have arguments with each other and whatnot. That's natural, But they're all striving to make themselves better and make each other better. And even with that, I could be completely wrong, but it doesn't feel like there's much of a crab in a bucket mentality in American sports. They're all happy for each other's success.
Yeah, and as far as from what I've seen, I played at the high school level. I never played at college level, but it generally seemed like that was a very team together mentality. Fortunately, a lot of times when you're on the university itself, all college athletes, they have access to top of the line facilities. They have not just workout facilities, but also meals as well. So that's just something to keep in mind. That when I mentioned that the specific instance outside of the bowl game, well, that was outside of the university ground, so it was sort of a unique but unfortunate instance, on that end. But yeah, I mean, generally, every time I've seen, or talked to, athletes, it's generally always you stick with your teammate. You generally, you kind of just stick together to go ahead and push each other on that end.
Awesome. Just out of curiosity, what high school did you play for, and in what sport?
Yeah, so I played soccer or football.
Yeah, we don't call it soccer out here.
I know. I figured that, and that's why I mentioned it. I generally call it football, unless I'm speaking with my American friends, because otherwise there'll be confusion.
That's good.
The easiest way to I usually will refer it to footy, because that makes it a little bit. You wouldn't refer to American football as footy, and so I played footy for a couple years. I wasn't necessarily, and even within high school, you have certain levels. So you have your varsity, your junior varsity, and all that. So I unfortunately did not get to varsity. So that's the extent of my ability there.
Just one last thing before, because at the end I want you to talk about a bit more about Baylor as an institute. I want to talk about the amount of fans that attend games. So, like, what's the average for a high school? What's the average for a college, and the average for a university? And just so for my viewers, just to clarify, Notre Dame are a college or they're a high school?
University, yeah.
Okay, just to clarify. All right, so yeah, what's the average attendance for high school and college?
So in high school, it really is going to depend. You have, and it's going to be regional too. So for example, you have some regions that are massively into different sports like hockey. Some regions that are really into basketball. Some that are into football, and also the quality at the high school level as well. I mean, you have certain high schools, especially here in Texas, who are somewhat like notoriously famous for being good on that end, and so you do have higher attendance at those high schools. But it's certainly you generally see at least anywhere between 100 to perhaps a couple thousand, depending on the high school.
Honestly, it's unreal, because I mentioned Notre Dame because I actually I was coaching in Chicago for a bit, coaching football, proper football, not American football, and I got invited to go watch a Notre Dame game. I'm actually going to show the viewers a quick clip, just to show you the extent of the amount of fans that actually turn up for the games, and these kids are anything from like 16 to 23 years old. Have a look at this. Now that's just a small snippet of the amount of fans there. It is packed to the rafters and such. The thing that intrigued me about that is just for those young players to be playing in front of those crowds at such a young age, they surely won't fear anything.
Yeah, and I mean that's one of those things that you generally get, especially at the college level. It's you have tens of thousands of people to come and watch you play. Not every first year or freshman gets on the field, but they definitely do tend to experience that and get that game atmosphere. Now, in regards to some of these bowl games too, like, for example, I'm sure maybe you have heard of it, but the Rose Bowl in California, it has 100,000 stadium capacity, and that does get filled up.
Is it Michigan as well that has 100,000 capacity?
I can't remember which one I can't remember the exact number for the Rose Bowl or Notre Dame, but I mean, you have, for example, I can talk on Baylor. Baylor has a 45,000 capacity, and that for the most part gets filled up. So you do have 40,000 plus fans show up, and that is to put it into context. Baylor is a smaller university as far as attendance goes. So some of these larger universities, like the University of Texas, Notre Dame, Alabama, that have historically really good football programs. LSU, their stadium is infamously known as Death Valley because it's such a scary environment to play in. Those stadiums are all packed. So the amount of attendance and revenue for these universities is there, definitely.
And do you feel that that's what's keeping like these universities afloat, or do they get like government support with their funding? Because obviously, like on the campus, they will have the basketball court, the American football, the ice hockey, the hockey. It's all in one campus.
Yeah, and in that end, I mean the revenue streams. I wouldn't say it necessarily keeps the universities afloat. That is an entirely different argument, because you have extremely high college tuition rates that just have been going up over the years, but they definitely contribute to the massive stadiums and the multi-million-dollar facilities that all these athletes have access to. So
brilliant. Well, I'm going to leave the last bit to you. Talk to us about Baylor.
So I like I said, I did go to Baylor University. Proud Baylor Bear fan. I'm excited to see what this season's coming up. Our new head coach. I say new. He came in last year, but our head coach in football. He came from LSU after our former coach went to go coach in the NFL. So that's exciting. It's always interesting to see that new system, and I'm hoping for a better season than last year in regards to that. And then as far as basketball, I mean, can't necessarily do much better than we did this past season. Won the national championship and March Madness, and now. We spoke about some of those players that graduate early, or not necessarily graduate, but they go to declare for the draft early. I think a big part of that team is going to be entering the draft this coming season. So
I'll make sure to look out for that. 100%, 100%. So yeah, listen, guys, an amazing discussion. It was a two-part discussion. First part talking about Mexico and the US, obviously players coming into Europe and the effect that it's had on the Mexican nationals team mainly, and not only that, obviously the American national team. But the second part, which I'm so excited about, is us talking about predominantly American sports. So Santiago is going to have that insight. I'm here with a bit of knowledge, and I'm willing to learn as well, and about mainly to expand on it beyond what we see on the TV, So yeah, look out for it. It's going to be our brand new show on. Yes, it will be on Eagle-Eyed Football, but it's our show together, and we're going to be working together on this, and it's going to be exciting times, very exciting times. So, guys, thanks for tuning in. Thanks to my guest Santiago, main man out here. And yeah, definitely look out for future content from the both of us. Peace.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Actually, I forgot to even say, like, share, subscribe to Eagle Eye Football. Let's go.